Hello. We are back to break down all of the main card fights from this weekend's card, headlined by Mackenzie Dern and Angela Hill. All of the fights that we're going to be talking about in today's video will, of course, be from a betting perspective, and all of them are pretty interesting matchups as well. So I hope you're going to get a lot of value out of the things we're going to be discussing. As ever, I've put a lot of work, a lot of time into researching these fights, and all the information I'm going to be sharing with you is simply from footage that I've watched over the last few days of all the fighters competing on this main card to try and give us some idea of how both fighters in each matchup match up stylistically. If you like these breakdown videos and you get a lot of value out of them, don't forget you can watch breakdown videos just like the ones in this YouTube video for all the prelim matchups on this card. All you need to do is head on over to my website, mmabettingtips.com. You'll find a link for that in the description below, as well as breakdown videos for all the prelim matchups. You'll also get to see what all my bets are for this weekend's card, and on top of that, you'll also gain access to VIP chat room where you can talk to myself, other members of the community. We've got a good little community. There's people chatting in a VIP chat room pretty much 24/7. And for the next UFC event, I'll also be launching a Discord, which will be pretty cool because I get a chance to talk to you guys every day. You get a chance to know you guys better. There'll be like 3 parts of the Discord channel and stuff, so it'll be pretty cool. I get to know you guys better and say thank you for all of you that like the video every week, leave a comment, that kind of thing. It really helps give these videos a boost in the YouTube algorithm. It helps a lot, and it just makes creating these videos, which do take a lot of time, just makes it all worthwhile, because every week I don't want to let you guys down. I want to make sure I put one of these videos out for all of you to show up every week. So I really appreciate you guys, and I hope you're going to get a lot of value out of today's video. So I'm going to kick things off by talking about the main event between Angela Hill and Mackenzie Dern, which is a really interesting fight. And we'll kick things off by taking a look at the odds, because this is one of those matchups where the odds really are making this fight quite tricky from a betting point of view. So we can see that Mackenzie Dern is the favourite at average odds of around 1.57. And my implied probability calculator up. So Mackenzie Dern is the favourite at odds of about 1.57, which is going to be minus 175 for an implied probability of 64%. And Angela Hill is the underdog at average odds of 2.45, which is going to be plus 145 for an implied probability of 41%. So Angela Hill is 38 years old, 5'3", with a 64.5-inch reach, and Mackenzie Dern, 30 years old, 5'4", with a 63-inch reach. So as we can see, both of them are roughly the same size, but there's a huge difference in age here, with Angela Hill being absolutely ancient for a strawweight, which this fight is obviously taking place at. So I don't want to be disrespectful. You should never talk about a lady's age, but obviously we know that Father Time is undefeated, and the strawweight division is the lightest weight class in the UFC. The lighter weight classes, heavily dependent on fighters who are fast, athletic, have their reflexes intact, which tend to be some of the qualities which decline fastest and first as you start to get older. So at 38 years old, Angela Hill is very, very, very old for a strawweight. And if you look at the top 15 of the strawweight division, there really aren't many fighters in the top 15 over the age of 35. This is a young person's game, like most sports are, especially ones that are very physically demanding. And so Hill is definitely in the tail end of her career, and also should be declining from fight to fight. However, in all aspects of life, in all aspects of sport, you're always going to get outliers who kind of defy the trends and defy the odds. You think about a guy like Daniel Cormier, who, some of his best years were in his late 30s. I know, again, is different in the heavier weight classes that Cormier competed in compared to the lighter weight classes that Hill has competed in. It's rare that you see a fighter in their late 30s, perform really well into their late 30s in the lighter weight classes. But what I will say about Hill is that she's not really showing any signs of major decline. And what's also quite interesting about Hill is that she's actually making improvements in the two areas which I felt really held her back in her prime. So two of her biggest weaknesses throughout her career were, the fact that she did used to slow down quite a lot as fights progress. I don't know if her cardio's improved or her diet's improved or her training's improved or just her, comfort level in the octagon and ability to pace herself has improved. But, whatever the reason is, Hill just doesn't really slow down like she used to. She's a lot better at fighting at a higher pace now at 38 years old than she was at, in her early 30s, which is kind of crazy. On top of that, Angela Hill's biggest weakness throughout her career has been her ground game. And it still is to some extent, but it's nowhere near as big of an issue for Angela Hill as it used to be, because Hill's takedown defense used to be an absolute joke. Like, a strong gust of wind used to be enough to take Angela Hill down, whereas these days her takedown defense has improved a lot. She's not easy to get down these days, and she's made huge improvements in that area, and she continues to improve. So what's interesting about this fight is that I've gone blurry, and we need to there we go. Why have we got a hair on my thumb as well? Yeah, man, it's one of those situations where, even in this later stage of Hill's career, she's not really showing any signs of decline, and she's actually improving in two areas that held her back for much of her career. So I just wanted to point that out. Obviously, we've got to talk about the fact that Photoshop is still open, and it shouldn't be. So let's close that down, or it's going to maybe slow my stream down a little bit. But yeah, man, Angela Hill, Mackenzie Dern, two fighters with big weaknesses the other can exploit, but Hill is showing evidence of making big improvements in her areas of weakness, whereas Mackenzie Dern isn't really. So obviously we all know that this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Angela Hill, decent kickboxer. Mackenzie Dern, world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. And we know if the fight stays standing, Hill's likely to do pretty well. If the fight goes to the ground, there's no ambiguity really. We know that Dern is going to absolutely dominate. But the biggest problem with Mackenzie Dern is that she just has absolutely no offensive wrestling at all. So in order for her to get fights to the ground, she needs to either rely on her opponent making a mistake and slipping or falling over, or being caught in one of her quite ineffective trips and throws, or she needs to hurt him on the feet and hope to kind of catch him off balance, or catch him flat-footed and drag him to the ground, with the trips and the judo throws that she likes to try and use to get her opponents to the ground. Aside from that, Mackenzie Dern, we've seen her pull guard in the past, we've seen her roll for legs in the past. For the most part, it's ineffective. But Mackenzie Dern isn't really a fighter that you see shoot too many traditional wrestling style takedowns. She shoots the odd single leg, but you'll very rarely see Dern go for a body lock takedown or a single leg or a double leg, and when she does, she is painfully ineffective with them. Her offensive wrestling just isn't good. And for the longest time, when we were breaking down Mackenzie Dern's fights, we were saying, look, she's young, she's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. She's new to the sport of MMA. She's got time on her side. It's only a matter of time before she develops some offensive wrestling. And when she does, she's going to be a nightmare. She's going to be a potential future champion because of how crazy good she is on the ground. The only reason, in my opinion, why Dern hasn't already run through the entire division is because she simply has no wrestling. So she finds it so difficult to get fights to the ground. But the problem with Dern is she has shown little to no improvement in her offensive wrestling since she came to the UFC. And at what point do we stop, giving her, like, giving her the benefit of the doubt that she may at some point show up with significantly better offensive wrestling that we've seen from her in the past? Because what is particularly concerning about Mackenzie Dern is she's lost 2 of her last 3 fights against fighters who are really bad on the ground. Marina Rodriguez. I mean, we all know how bad Marina Rodriguez is on the ground. We, saw her get absolutely dominated by Virna Jandiroba recently. We all remember what Carla Esparza did, just took her down over and over and over again. And obviously, Zhao Nanyang, we've seen her stopped by Carla Esparza. She's very bad on the ground as well. So for an elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner like Dern, an elite grappler, to be struggling on the ground against fighters like Yan and Rodriguez is just unacceptable. Because if Yan and Rodriguez were difficult to take down, then you could let Dern off the hook. But they are not difficult to take down. I mean, look at what Virna Jandiroba did to Marina Rodriguez recently. Dern should not be losing to fighters like Marina Rodriguez. It is red flag city. And so it's never too late to learn. For most of Damian Maia's career, he didn't really have any offensive wrestling either. Later in his career, he started to develop more offensive wrestling, which enabled him to use his high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu more. But this is going to be Mackenzie Dern's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th. She's going to be her 11th fight in the UFC. She's had multiple main events. This was a main event fight against Yan. This was a main event fight against Rodriguez. And so she's not like a young prospect anymore. She's had 15 pro fights. She's had 10 fights in the UFC. She's 30 years old. Will she just be one of these fighters that never improves in the area she really, really needs to improve in? It's difficult to say. I respect UFC fighters to an unbelievably high degree. Nothing makes me cringe more than when I see people online criticizing UFC fighters. Because I think at the end of the day, man in the arena, never judge a man until you walk a mile in his shoes, right? So I hate to be critical of UFC fighters, hate to talk shit about UFC fighters, because I respect the hell out of Mackenzie Dern, everything she's done, everything she's going to do. I would not have the balls to go into a cage in my underwear and fight another human being to the death until the time limit was up or the referee stepped in and stopped it. It's wild, right? But I do have to be a bit critical of Mackenzie Dern here, because if you're in my live betting group, you'll know that we talk every single week about how game planning, fight IQ, strategy are the most important aspects of the game. And when you are new to MMA, or you don't really, say you're just like a casual fan, and that's not derogatory either. The whole MMA casual thing gets thrown around as like a derogatory slur. It's so stupid. UFC is a form of entertainment, and people are busy with busy lives. They don't have the time to go into as much depth as we do. They don't have the time to learn the sport at the level that we learn it. So I do not mean to use the word casual fan as a derogatory term. What I mean by casual fan is, I guess, maybe so to the naked eye, when you look at UFC fighters, you would assume that... Why have I gone blurry again? I need to get a new camera. I keep saying that. Fucking hell. When you're kind of, looking at the sport and you don't have a deep understanding of the sport, you would assume that the bare minimum to expect from every fighter in the UFC, considering this is the Super Bowl of mixed martial arts, right, to quote Dana White, the pinnacle of combat sports, you would assume that every fighter in the UFC knows how to win. They would be very aware of how rounds are scored and fights are scored, and tactically what they need to do to win on a very basic level. You know, you think about the game planning and strategy that goes into other sports like the NFL or football. I call it football, you might call it soccer, whatever. But you think about, you know, professional sports, NFL, NBA, NHL. They have entire teams of analysts devising game plans and strategies and the optimum way to do things. And as a result, if you're just a casual sports fan that enjoys watching the UFC on a Saturday night, you would assume the same from UFC fighters, that they would know how to win. They would know how fights are scored. They would have a general basic understanding of game planning, tactics, and strategy. But every single weekend in the live betting group, we see many examples, multiple examples per card of fighters that just have no tactical awareness at all. They have no idea how rounds are scored. They have no idea how to win rounds. They're completely oblivious to what they should be doing. And Mackenzie Dern strikes me as one of those fighters, not to be disrespectful, but her game planning, strategy, tactical aspect of her game is severely lacking. Severely lacking. And we can see it straight from the horse's mouth here. Big shout out to the man Jedi Goodman. If you're not following Jedi Goodman on Twitter, like, what are you doing, man? You should be #1 follow on everyone's list after me. Obviously, go follow me. Link in the description below. But go follow Jedi Goodman as well if you're on Twitter, man. But yeah, shout out to the man Jedi Goodman. Always posting really cool clips of very interesting talking points from MMA. But yeah, we talk every single weekend in the live betting group about how there are so many fighters in the UFC that have no fucking clue how fights are scored and tactically what they should be doing to win. And here we hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Listen to what Mackenzie Dern says here. It blows my mind.
So it's like, basically, this camp was like tactic in having this vision of fighting that I never had before. And I feel kind of like, man, I'm like 10 fights in the UFC and I just found that out now, you know, like to understand that I just need to win the round. And if you do that each round, you win the fight, you know, instead of me thinking, like I would finish the round and out of 1 minute, I'd spend maybe 20 seconds. Like, did I win that round? You know, like at this level, the top 5, top 10, you can't finish the round and not know if you won or not. You know, you need to be leaving the round and know, like, yeah, I'm winning here, I'm losing here. Okay, what I needed to steal the round. Okay, what are the judges seeing? You know, and that's kind of the tactic that I was able to train on this camp, since it was so crazy, was more like understanding the MMA game, and that we do use the judges and we do like steal things. You know, you steal the round and do this and have that, instead of me going for submission and falling on bottom and maybe they steal the round at the end. You know.
So there you hear it straight from the horse's mouth. After 10 fights in the UFC, Mackenzie Dern is only now learning about how to steal rounds and put her stamp on each round and how fights are scored and how to approach the fight from a tactical point of view. It's absolutely fucking mind-blowing to me. You know, she's not that far away from the title picture. She is an absolutely elite athlete in the UFC. She's main evented 2 UFC Fight Night cards already. This will be her 3rd. And yet, as one of the best strawweights in the world, tactically she has no fucking clue how to win a fight. It's mind-blowing to me. So, I'm bringing this up because I'm trying to say something without being disrespectful to Mackenzie Dern, but it's kind of like, how could you not know? And I think this is the reason why Mackenzie Dern doesn't make any improvement to her offensive wrestling at all. Because the whole world can see that if she just developed an above average level of offensive wrestling. If she learned how to shoot a single leg or a double leg or a body lock takedown, with her cardio, with her toughness, with her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, her athleticism, she'd be a fucking nightmare. She'd probably win the belt relatively easily, I would imagine. And so it is one of those things where listening to her talk there about how she's only now learning how to steal rounds after 10 fights in the UFC, I am not that optimistic that her offensive wrestling is going to look that much better this weekend than it ever has in the past. And she just doesn't seem to be improving in that area. And why is this relevant? Why are we talking so much about this? Well, we're talking about it because if she can't get this fight to the ground, she's going to be in a lot of trouble. Because Angela Hill is probably going to light her up and outstrike her for 5 rounds. And Mackenzie Dern's biggest problem in this fight is that at the moment, the main way that she tries to get fights to the ground is with trips and throws from the clinch. She loves to turn her hips in and look for a judo throw. Most of her takedown attempts come very high up above her opponent's hips. This is very problematic when you face someone like Angela Hill, because Angela Hill is very strong, very athletic. She has good balance. She also has a base in Muay Thai. So she's very strong in the clinch. So in order to take someone like Angela Hill down, you need to get in deep on their legs and hips and upset their balance. Trying to take her down above hip height from the clinch is very difficult to do because of how strong and comfortable she is in the clinch. So this is a difficult fight for Mackenzie Dern. And it's also the reason why she struggled against Marina Rodriguez. Marina Rodriguez has a base in Muay Thai. And if you go back and watch that fight, same thing. Most of Mackenzie Dern's attempts to get the fight to the ground come above hip height. And because Rodriguez is very comfortable in the clinch, strong in the clinch, she dealt with that just fine. And so, if Mackenzie Dern doesn't show up having made some improvements to her offensive wrestling, this is going to be a tricky fight for her. Now, having said that, the problem with betting Angela Hill this weekend is that the skill gap is so big on the ground. Mackenzie Dern is so dangerous on the ground that Hill has no room for error. Because Dern may only need this fight to go to the ground once in 25 minutes to finish Hill. So Hill might slip, she might throw a kick off balance and fall over, she might throw a kick, Dern might catch it, turn it into a takedown, Dern might actually get a takedown, Hill may, fall into Dern's guard when she pulls guard, something like that. There are lots of ways in 25 minutes that this fight could go to the ground a couple times, even if Dern's not necessarily able to take Hill down. It's an MMA fight, right? It's chaotic. A lot of shit can happen. The point being, this is a really tricky fight from a betting point of view because it's very difficult to bet on Dern as a reasonably big favourite because stylistically that if Hill can keep this fight standing, which she stands a pretty good chance of doing with how bad Dern's offensive wrestling is, then this is going to be a tricky fight for Dern. If Marina Rodriguez can beat Mackenzie Dern, then you bet your ass Angela Hill can, because Hill's takedown offense and defensive wrestling and ability to scramble back up to her feet is 10 times better than Marina Rodriguez is. So if Marina Rodriguez can do it, you bet your ass Angela Hill can do it as well. So for that reason, I wouldn't feel great about betting on Dern as the big favourite. But on the flip side, you look at Angela Hill and her odds carry an implied probability of about 40%. And you look at that and you go, man, that's not a particularly good deal, because if Hill just makes one mistake in 25 minutes, it could be over for her because of how dangerous Dern is on the ground and how big the skill gap is on the ground. If Hill gets put in a bad position on the ground, I wouldn't have any faith in her ability to work through it. So it is very, very, very tricky. A very, very tricky fight. And I think this is a fight where the odds are probably where they should be. Complicated matchup, but I love it. I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. So in terms of the over-under on this one, the odds are in the even money odds range. I do agree with that. Or do I? It's tricky. Obviously, the majority of strawweight fights go to a decision. You can see that Angela Hill's last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights have gone the distance. Dern, as she has started to face a higher level of opponent, has gone the distance in 4 of her last 5 as well. So yeah, man, just based on that, I would go with the fight being more likely to go to a decision. Mike, I have 2 concerns with that. Obviously, if Dern does get the fight to the ground, Hill's going to be in a lot of trouble. On top of that, it's a 5-rounder. Hill will slow a little bit into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds, which will make it easier to get her down. So, you know, I lean more the fight go into a decision, but it's not probably not something I'm going to bet myself. I'm not crazy about it. Because like I say, Hill's got very little room for error. And also, you know, we'll bring it back to the age. At 38 years old, like, at some point soon, Hill is going to decline. Like, there's no way to dress it up. As much as I love Hill, you know, Father Time's undefeated at the end of the day. If we take a look at the props on this one, I would be interested in... So the odds on the decision props, pretty bad. Odds on Dern by submission, pretty bad. Pretty bad. Yeah, I'm not in love with the props on that fight. I would give them a miss. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is the co-main event between Anthony Hernandez and Edmen Shahbazyan. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Hernandez is the favourite at average odds of about 1.47, which is going to be minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. We take a look at the odds on Shahbazyan, he's around an average of 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So Shahbazyan is 25 years old, 6'2" with a 74-inch reach. Hernandez, 29 years old, 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. Age isn't really a factor in this one either. And primarily you got 2 grapplers on your hands here. And it's an interesting stylistic matchup. I like Anthony Hernandez quite a lot in this fight though, because Hernandez's style tends to be kryptonite for Shahbazyan's style, or the type of fighter that Shahbazyan is. This is because, for whatever reason, Shahbazyan is just one of these guys that slows down a lot as fights wear on. And you don't even need to make him work particularly hard. It's not like he slows because he'll adrenaline dump or exert a lot of energy. Around about the midway point of round 2, he just gets really tired. And, you know, Shahbazyan seems very intelligent. I'm sure he trains very hard. I'm sure he eats a great diet. I think Shahbazyan is probably just cursed by being one of these guys that just has genetically bad cardio. Because the way I would look at it is, he's had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fights in the UFC. His cardio has cost him quite a few times now. It cost him against Imavov, cost him against Hermanson, cost him against Brunson, almost cost him against Darren Stewart. And so, you know, it's not like Shahbazyan's cardio has only let him down once or twice here or there. It lets him down and causes him to lose pretty much any time that the fight goes to a decision. You know, if you look at his record, he's only won 1 fight by decision in the 9 fights he's had in the UFC, and that was a split, and he tired out bad in that fight against Darren Stewart. So this is one of those matchups where it is a tough fight for Shahbazyan, because I feel if his cardio were to improve, it would have already happened. You know, I feel at this point Shahbazyan's probably just one of those fighters that comes along that has bad cardio. And the problem with facing someone like Anthony Hernandez when you've got cardio issues, is that while Hernandez may not be the most skilled fighter, he might not be the most technical or the best defensively on the feet, might not be the best grappler either. What Hernandez does to is get in your face, force you to engage, and force you to work from the very first bell until the last. He's an absolute buzzsaw. He pushes a crazy pace, and he just looks to outwork and out-hustle you. So irrespective of how these two guys match up stylistically, and of course we will talk about how they match up stylistically, but irrespective of how they match up stylistically, if Shabazian doesn't finish Hernandez early, I just think Hernandez is going to be able to outwork Shabazian in the second half of this fight and just find a way to get the win. Now, there are things that Shabazian does better than Hernandez, especially early on when they're both fresh. I think Shabazian will have a pretty big advantage when it comes to striking. Hernandez is quite sloppy, quite scrappy on the feet, not particularly good defensively. But what I do like about Hernandez is that he fights at a high pace. He throws a high volume. He forces you to engage. He forces you to work. So while early on Shabazian is going to be the more technical striker out of the two, I think you'll see Hernandez's work rate close the skill gap in the second half of the fight as Shabazian starts to slow. And that's when you can start to see Hernandez have a lot more success with his striking. Again, when it comes to grappling, both guys are probably pretty even. Shabazian's a decent grappler. Hernandez is a decent grappler. Shabazian is probably the stronger and more physically imposing out of the two on the ground. Hernandez's style of grappling tends to be to out-hustle you. But the thing is, the strength, the power, the physicality of Shabazian comes at a cost because, he slows. And so again, Shabazian may have some success in the grappling exchanges early, but similar to what we saw happen in the Hernandez fight against Josh Fremd, as soon as, and the Rodolfo Vieira fight to be fair, as soon as we hit that sort of midway through the second round, and Shabazian starts to slow, that's when we know Hernandez will really start to drown him, in the work rate that he's going to push on the ground. So it's a good stylistic matchup for Hernandez. He might run into some problems early. He may struggle early because Shabazian is probably a slightly better striker and grappler, if we're being honest. Certainly a more dangerous striker. But having those skills is no use if you can't use them for the full 15 minutes. And I think it will only be a matter of time before Hernandez takes over in this fight and wears Shabazian down if Shabazian doesn't get an early finish. So unfortunately that makes this a little bit tricky from a betting point of view, because with Hernandez being a reasonably big favourite, his advantages are already for the most part baked into the odds. And I would not bet Shabazian in this fight just because I don't like to bet on fighters who slow down a lot. Apologies for the alerts popping off. That might mean actually something crazy is going on with the old cryptos. Let me just double check very, very quickly. Nothing crazy is happening. Oh, it looks like Bitcoin's going to have a leg up actually. A little bit of a leg up. Little uptrend here on the 15-minute. Just got some alerts notifying me of important changes on the Bitcoin chart. So just have to check that out just in case anything catastrophic were to happen to my positions, but actually looks pretty good. Actually looks like we're gonna have a little move back up to 27.4 here, which is nice. Anyway. So yeah, it's one of those fights where I think the odds are pretty much where they should be. Shabazian may have some success early on, but if you look at his odds, they carry an implied probability of 36%. I don't really want to be betting on a fighter at an implied probability of 36%. That's probably only got a good 6 or 7 minutes in them. And if they don't get the job done in the first 6 or 7 minutes, they're going to struggle really bad. But what we do know about Shabazian is that he's tough as nails. Even when he gets tired, it's not easy to get him out of there. We saw him take an absolute beating against Derek Brunson, and he hung in there until the third round. We saw him grind it out against Darren Stewart. We saw him hanging there against Jack Hermanson. So I do quite like the over 1.5 rounds on this fight, because I think it will be a war of attrition. I think Shabazian will be tough enough to hang in there with Hernandez until at least the second half of the fight. So I quite like over 1.5 rounds. I'll probably be betting that myself. Check the website, obviously, for confirmation. If I do bet it, I'll add it to the over-under betting tips database on the site. I'll let you know. But yeah, in terms of the prop bets, I think it's never a bad idea to bet on Hernandez to win in round 3 in a fight like this. You know, I mean, there's quite a big odds spread, but I'm guessing if you shop around, you can get it at like plus 1,400. Hernandez, that's Hernandez win by submission in round 3. I would not go for that because obviously Hernandez could stop the fight with ground and pound as well if Shabazian's too tired to defend himself on the ground. So instead, I would go for Hernandez to win in round 3 straight up. 9.0 plus 800. I do like that. In terms of how Hernandez likes to finish his fights on the ground, submission. So it looks like he likes his submissions, but obviously, if Shabazian's too tired to defend himself, you could easily see Hernandez get a stoppage with ground and pound as well, which would go down as a knockout or TKO. But yeah, I would just go for Hernandez to win in round 3. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. So now let's break down the next fight, which is a very interesting one in the even money odds range between Emily Ducote and Lupita Godinez. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Godinez is the favourite. In actual fact, it's not the even money odds range anymore. It was earlier this week, but you can see Godinez's odds have declined a fair bit in the last couple of days. So now Godinez is a reasonably big favourite at average odds of about 1.65, which is going to be minus 154 for an implied probability of 61%. If we take a look at the odds on Ducote, she is around an average of call it 2.28, which is going to be plus 128 for an implied probability of 44%. So Ducote is 29 years old, 5'2", with a 63-inch reach. Godinez, 29 years old, 5'2", with a 61-inch reach. So both these ladies virtually identical in terms of size and age, and also quite similar in terms of fighting style as well. Now, every once in a while, a fight comes along in the UFC. This doesn't happen very often. Every once in a while, a fight does come along where I just don't really have a particularly strong opinion on how the fight will play out. And usually that only happens when you get two very well matched fighters that don't have any clear and obvious advantages over one another, and you also throw into the mix the fact that both fighters have particularly bad fight IQ, game planning and strategy, which then makes them more difficult to read because, I mean, they don't even really know what they're going to try and do. How the hell are we supposed to predict it? You know, Lupita Godinez is a really good example. In her last two fights, she faced fighters who, you know, she probably had a pretty big advantage over on the ground with her work rate, her cardio, and yet the Angela Hill fight in particular, she barely shot a takedown. She tried to win a kickboxing match against a superior kickboxer. Emily Ducote did exactly the same thing in her last fight against Angela Hill, barely tried to take Hill down. And of course, Godinez also demonstrated extremely bad fight IQ in her fight against Jessica Penne. I know these fights were a long time ago, but fight IQ is becoming a real big issue for Lupita Godinez, where, you know, in situations where she's got a big advantage on the ground over her opponent, for whatever reason, she's too stubborn to try and use it and tries to win kickboxing matches as well. So what's very difficult about betting this fight is that both Ducote and Lupita Godinez have very bad fight IQ. That makes them both unpredictable. So when you've got a fight that features two fighters that are very unpredictable, obviously makes the fight difficult to predict. So we've spoken about specific examples why both girls are difficult to bet on, difficult to trust, specific mistakes they've made in specific fights. But if you also look at their records, it also tells a bit of a story, because you've got Godinez winning by majority decision there, split decision there, split decision there. If we look at Ducote's record, you have got split decision there, split decision there, and she's also been involved in, you know, a fair amount of close fights throughout her career. The problem both these fighters have, they've actually got two problems. Neither of them does a particularly good job of putting their stamp on rounds, and neither of them do a particularly good job of using their strengths to exploit their opponent's weaknesses. And that makes this a very dangerous fight for betting, because even if one of them did have an advantage over the other, you couldn't trust them to go out and actually use it. You know, they'd more than likely go and do the complete opposite, which is very frustrating to watch. And I mean, when you look at, you know, Ducote's record 12-7, it tells the story as to how inconsistent, how bad her fight IQ is. So when you look at what they both bring to the table, they're both very similar. They both have small, compact, muscular frames. Their biggest strengths are their grappling. Ducote's obviously got a base in wrestling. I think she was a collegiate wrestler. Godinez's best strength is also her grappling, although she started life as a kickboxer. In terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, Ducote lands the harder, more impactful shots. She's got real power in her hands, nice leg kicks, whereas Godinez is more of these volume strikers that doesn't really hurt you on the feet. What Godinez does have that Ducote doesn't, though, is that Godinez does throw a far higher volume of strikes on the feet. So while Ducote will be landing the harder, more impactful strikes, Godinez will be landing a far higher volume. So that's kind of how they match up on the feet. On the ground, Emily Ducote has a huge advantage. Like I say, she's got a collegiate wrestling background. Godinez is, you know, has evolved somewhat into a grappler, but started life as a kickboxer, so she just doesn't have that level, doesn't have that experience that Ducote has. And so, you know, Godinez's takedown defense is quite bad. She's not the best off her back. She's not the most physically imposing grappler. If Ducote came into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, I think she would cause Godinez huge problems. The problem with Ducote is that we say this every time she fights, and she never fucking grapples. She wants to just strike all the time. And so, if Ducote barely tried to take down Angela Hill, who everyone knows is a kickboxer, for me it's very unlikely she's going to try and take down Godinez, who is, you know, her strongest skill set is her grappling. Like, if Ducote isn't going to try and take down the kickboxer, it's not logical for her to try and take down the more well-rounded MMA grappler, right? It wouldn't make much sense. But then a fight like this often doesn't when you're dealing with two fighters that do have particularly bad fight IQ, game planning, decision making. When it comes to a fighter like Ducote, though, you can always, you know, say what we said about Mackenzie Dern and say, well, you know, maybe she will have learned from that loss against Angela Hill, and she'll come out and grapple hard in this fight because she won't want to make the same mistake again. But, you know, with a fighter like Ducote, with a fighter like Mackenzie Dern, we've seen them make these mistakes over and over and over and over and over again. It's very hard again to put trust in them and give them the benefit of the doubt to come out and perform in a way that is going to give them the best chance of winning. So this is one of those fights where it's very difficult to call. I do think it'll likely be razor close because both girls will, you know, make mistakes that will gift opportunities and gift rounds to their opponent. On the feet, difficult to call. It's power and technique of Ducote versus volume and work rate of Godinez. Grappling, Ducote definitely has a big advantage, but it won't mean anything if she doesn't try to use it, and she often doesn't, so that doesn't really mean a lot. That's pretty much how I see this fight. I don't really have a strong opinion on it. I'm very much on the fence. I wouldn't trust either of these with my money, that's for damn sure. This one is an easy pass for me. A great fight for live betting because we do know a lot about both fighters. So if you're in my live betting group, hopefully we'll be able to make some money on this one this weekend. Obviously, you know, May's been a really good month so far, but yeah, pre-fight betting, fucking minefield. It is very, very likely this fight goes the distance, though. If you look at both girls, throughout the majority of their career, they've been decisionators. Mixed in from time to time you get a finish, but for the most part, Ducote goes to a decision quite often. Godinez, definitely a decisionator, with only one of her last 10 fights ending inside the distance. We know both girls are very tough as well, so Ducote take a lot of damage in that Angela Hill fight and hang in there. We've seen Godinez in a couple of wars as well, and it's not easy to get her out of there. She is a tough Mexican, so very likely the fight goes the distance, but obviously the odds reflect that as steep favourite odds, so you can't really bet it unless you like putting your money in positions like that, which personally is not for me. I would prefer to gamble my money on frog tokens and magical internet money than betting stuff like fight goes with decision. We're only going to get a very small return for putting up a lot of cash. Doesn't float my boat. So in terms of the prop bets on this one, again, tricky. If you're one of these people that like to bet a prop on every fight to make watching the fight more interesting, I would probably go with Ducote to win by decision. Odds are 3.50 plus 250, purely because she comes in with a grappling heavy game plan. I think she can have a lot of success. I think she can use it to steal rounds as well. I think it's very close to a 50-50 fight, and so with the fight most likely going to go to a decision in a 50-50 fight, you're better off hitting Ducote by decision. But I don't have a confident feeling about this one, so it's an easy pass for me. I hope you found that useful, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Andre Filho against Joaquin Buckley. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Filho is the favourite at average odds of about 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. Take a look at the odds on Buckley. He's around an average of 1.44, which is going to be minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. So Filho is 29 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. Buckley, 29 years old, 5'10" with a 76-inch reach. I'm just double checking that this fight is actually at welterweight. Of course, Buckley deciding to make the move down, the long overdue move down in my opinion, from the middleweight division. He was undecided from middleweight, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing how he looks in the welterweight division. So I think he could be really good. I think Buckley's a great fighter. I'm very high on him. I think this is a really good stylistic matchup for him to make his welterweight debut as well. I think Filho is a good dance partner to help Buckley put on an exciting fight and get comfortable at welterweight, or a little bit more comfortable. I'm glad the UFC didn't throw Buckley to the wolves here and give him like a tough guy from the top 10. Glad they're not necessarily giving him a layup, because Filho is tough, he's game, he's scrappy, he's dangerous on the feet, but definitely a winnable fight for Buckley. So Buckley and Filho, pretty much the same age, pretty much the same size. Let's talk about the skills between these two. So we know both these guys like to stand and bang. You'll very rarely see either of them try to take anyone down. For the most part, these guys love to throw down, get into firefights, and for that reason, it is a good stylistic matchup for both of them. It's good matchmaking on the part of the UFC. For me, it's a very good stylistic matchup for Buckley, though, because he is better defensively than Filho. He has better footwork and movement than Filho. He throws a much more diverse range of strikes than Filho as well. Filho, for the most part, is just a boxer, just plods forward, looking to throw boxing combinations. Buckley's light on his feet. He's got spinning attacks, a diverse range of kicks, good combinations in his hands, good power, good speed, covers distance quickly. And I think the difference as well between these two is that Buckley can fight outside of a range where he can be hit and blitz forward and pick Filho off and catch him cold and flat-footed, whereas Filho, where he fights from the boxing stance, even though his boxing's pretty good, he's got a lot of power in his hands, he needs to get much closer to Buckley in order to land than Buckley needs to get in order to land on Filho, because Buckley can use his length with his long kicks, his blitzing attacks, Buckley has just got more options in this fight, more weapons that he can use to cause Filio problems. And on top of that, a huge reason for favouring Buckley in this fight is that I feel he's far more durable as well. Of course, we've seen him knocked out, in the Kevin Holland fight, but for the most part, Buckley's chin's pretty good. He's pretty durable. When he has been knocked out in fights, is when he's been absolutely death-shotted, like caught with an absolute bomb, like in the Alessio De Chirico matchup. I'm not saying that can't happen against Filio, because Filio is a dangerous striker as well, but Filio is a guy that gets rocked, wobbled, dropped, knocked out in almost every fight. Now he's facing a very dangerous, very powerful, very athletic, very explosive striker in Jacqueline Buckley that is probably going to land big, clean and hard multiple times in this fight. And I just don't think Filio's got the chin to be able to withstand that. So it's a good fight for Buckley. Again, the odds don't get me excited. I'm not that attracted to betting Buckley as a big favourite, but I definitely wouldn't be betting Filio here. I think he's way too fragile. I think very likely Buckley catches him with something and knocks him out. So in terms of the over-under on this one, I'd be surprised if this fight went to a decision because of how aggressive both guys are and how dangerous both guys are. Someone is probably getting knocked out. I'd be very surprised if this fight went to a decision, but the odds are very steep again, so not much upside in betting that. In terms of the prop bets, Buckley to win by knockout or TKO is the most likely outcome, but again, the odds are very steep, so the props are a bit dead on that fight. I would give them a miss. So now let's talk about the fight between Carlos Diego Ferreira. As he dropped the Carlos, his first name, he used to be called Carlos Diego Ferreira back in the day. Now his tapology just says Diego Ferreira. Anyway, he's fighting Michael Johnson. If we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Ferreira is the favourite at average odds of around 1.63, which is going to be minus 159 for an implied probability of 61%. If we take a look at the odds on Michael Johnson, he's around an average of 2.30, which is going to be plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. So Ferreira is 38 years old, 5'9" with a 74-inch reach. Johnson, 36 years old, 5'10" with a 73.5-inch reach, but he will be 37 years old soon. So both guys about the same size and about the same age, and they are both definitely in the tail end of their careers and on a very steep decline. Now, Michael Johnson looked very good in his last fight against Mark Diakiese. However, styles make fights, and we know throughout Michael Johnson's career, his biggest weakness has been his takedown defense and ground game. And Johnson's one of these guys that totally capitulates if you put him in a bad position on the ground. He just completely falls apart and wilts. We've seen it happen, in the Thiago Moises fight. We've seen it happen in the Stevie Ray fight. We've seen it happen in the Darren Elkins fight. And so, even though I think Johnson's looked alright over the last couple of years, at the same time, old habits die hard. And I feel at 37 years old, it won't take much for Johnson to cave if he gets put in a bad position on the ground. Now, I know there's lots of issues with Ferreira. I know he's bad defensively on the feet. I know his cardio's not great. His fight against Gamrot ended in weird circumstances. I get it. I do get it. However, he's always been a tough fucker. He's reasonably durable. He's a very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and he does have some MMA grappling to go with it. So if Johnson doesn't knock Ferreira out, which isn't an easy thing to do, he's only been beaten 5 times in his career, and we can see in that time he's only been stopped 3 times in 23 pro fights, which is pretty good considering for the longest time he's been fighting monsters in the UFC's lightweight division. Look at the guys that he's been facing, right? A decent level of opponent, and many of them haven't been able to get him out of there. And so you'd have to bet at some point in the 15 minutes, Ferreira will get this fight to the ground, and when he does, Johnson's going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, with how sharp Johnson looked in his fight against both Jamie Malarkey and Mark Diakiese, if he can keep the fight standing, I think Ferreira's in a lot of trouble. I think Johnson will just dance around him and light him up. However, Johnson's takedown offense isn't bulletproof, and Ferreira can cause him big problems on the ground. So Ferreira is a tempting bet this weekend, but I probably will not bet him because he is old. He is going to be declining big time from fight to fight. And I do feel he's more shot than Johnson. The thing is, just like with Angela Hill, Johnson has to fight the perfect fight this weekend. He cannot afford to give up one takedown, or it could be over for him. I just don't think Johnson has got the takedown defense to avoid the ground for 3 rounds. So if he doesn't get an early knockout, could be in a lot of trouble here. So definitely lean Carlos Diego Ferreira. Or actually Diego Ferreira, the artist formerly known as Carlos Diego Ferreira. Wonder why he dropped the Carlos. I don't know. Let me know why that happened. So yeah, man, do heavily lean towards Ferreira here, but I don't like the idea of betting on 38-year-old lightweights. Just want to double check this fight is at lightweight, because I know Johnson has flirted with featherweight in the past. This is at lightweight. Very cool, very cool. All right, so I do think it's very likely this fight ends inside the distance. I think Ferreira is either going to get knocked out on the feet or Johnson's going to get submitted on the ground. I'd be surprised if this went to a decision. The odds are steep though, and I don't feel confident enough in the fight not going to a decision to bet that at these odds. So that is an easy pass for me. In terms of the prop bets, Ferreira by submission, odds are quite steep on that. Yeah, I'm not really a fan of those props either. I would want juicier odds. Like if I could have got Ferreira by knockout at TKO at like plus 800, 9.0, something like that, that would have got me interested on the chance that maybe Ferreira would have been able to have got a stoppage on the ground with ground and pound as opposed to submission, which would then be classified as a win by knockout at TKO. But these odds are just a bit steep for me. I don't like it because we know if you look at Ferreira's record, he does favour. Does he though? Yeah, you see a lot more submission wins on the ground than wins by knockout. Although he did get a win by ground and pound there against Carl Nelson. But yeah, anyway, I hope you found that useful. So, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. Link in the description below. Like the video if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. Helps boost the video and get more people seeing this stuff, which helps the channel to grow and gets me more views, man, which is very much appreciated. Subscribe if you haven't already. Take care, everyone. Love you all. Have a great week, and we got a week off next week, so I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Have some good time off, man. Enjoy the family, play some video games, trade some magic internet money, watch some movies, and the UFC will be back before we know it for the busy summer schedule. So love you all. Take care, guys. Bye.